On March 13th, 2007, Lance Mackey does something no one had ever done in the sled dogging world. Facing brutal winds and bone-chilling temperatures, Lance knew exactly what he needed to do to fight, as he had beaten cancer, and now he was going to win the Iditarod for the second year in a row, becoming the first back-to-back champion in the history of the sport. Coming from a great sled dogging family, Lance put himself above the rest, winning the Iditarod for the second straight year, and would go on to win 2 more back-to-back, putting on one of the most dominant streaks in sled dogging history. We're going to dive into Lance Mackey and his incredible journey today on Daily Sports History. Welcome to Daily Sports History. I'm Ethan Reese, your guide, as you daily learn more about sports history. Now, Lance was born in 1970 in Alaska, a place where sled dog racing is more than just a sport. It's a way of life. And he didn't just stumble into mushing. He was born into it. His father, Dick Mackey, was a legend in the sport and was actually a co-founding member to help start the Iditarod Trail Sled Race, which is known as the ultimate test of endurance for any musher and their dogs. And he was also involved in one of the most dramatic finishes in 1978, beating Rick Swinson by just 1 second, the closest the race has ever come on a finish. And Lance's older brother Rick followed in his father's footsteps, winning the Iditarod in 1983, both wearing the bib number 13. So it was almost an inevitability that Lance would become a musher as well. But Lance didn't take to it immediately. He had a lot of hardships, and as a teenager, he got into a lot of trouble, as he was a rebel and lived a wild lifestyle, getting into drugs and alcohol. But eventually, he did find his way into racing in the 1990s. But he was struggling financially, as he was unable to get top-tier sponsorships, and he had to scrape together his racing team. It didn't help that in 2001, he was diagnosed with throat cancer. He had to go through grueling treatment to help fight it, which left to permanent damage. He lost over 25% of his weight and some nerve damage as well, leaving him with little feelings in his hands and fingers. The doctors thought he may never race again. But Lance was a fighter, and he fought his way back. And in 2005, he began to sled dog race again, and he entered his first Yukon Quest, which is a grueling 1,000-mile race through the wilderness from Fairbanks, Alaska to Whitehorse, Yukon. And not only did he finish, he won in a stunning upset, signaling he was back and ready to focus on racing full-time. He would go on to win the Yukon Quest the next year as well, in 2006. And in 2007, he did something no one had ever done before. He would go on to win the Yukon Quest and the Iditarod that same year. No musher had ever pulled this off, as the races are just 2 weeks apart, and both of them are over 1,000 miles. The Yukon Quest is known as one of the toughest sled dog races in the world, and doesn't get as much hype as the Iditarod, as doesn't have as compelling of a story, but temperatures regularly can get to below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, as it is raced in February instead of March, so it is a colder time, and even more isolated than the Iditarod. But he would go on to win the race on February 20th, 2007, his third straight Yukon Quest title, winning it in a time of 10 days, 13 hours, and 10 minutes. Yes, these races are days, not just minutes. It is a long, hard race. And he became the first person to win 3 consecutive Yukon races. But that meant he just had 14 days to prepare for the Iditarod. Now, if you don't know much about the Iditarod, obviously you haven't watched the movie Balto. It's a great little movie that is roughly based on a story of getting supplies from Anchorage to Nome, Alaska. It's known as the last great race on Earth, for good reason, because it's got a compelling story behind it, and it's the Super Bowl of sled dog racing. The race started on March 3rd, 2007, with 84 mushers, which included multiple other champions who had won the race before. Now, Lance had his last name, which gave him some clout, as his father and brother had both won the race before, but it had been years since a Mackey had won the race, and Lance was always viewed as just the wild child who probably wouldn't accomplish very much in sled dog racing. But Mackey came out, and even though he only had 14 days to prepare after the Yukon Quest, this meant his team was in more shape and ready for the treacherous terrain, and almost made it seem easier, so they didn't start aggressive, They were conservative because they really needed to set the pace rather than push for the lead right away. And by day 6, Lance would end up taking the lead, with his lead dog, Larry, was proving unstoppable. By this point, many of the other teams were starting to feel the fatigue, but his dogs were battle-tested and continued to push. And by day 8 and 9, he was battling with previous winner Jeff King. Now, if you don't know, during this race, there's actually multiple stops along the way, and these stops are for the dogs and the riders, but really for the dogs. They need to be checked to make sure they're healthy by the vets, get some rest, and it's a humane thing to do this for the dogs. And it gives an actual break in the competition, and you're only required to take an 8-hour rest. And some people take longer, some people take less. It depends on how you are as a competitor and how you're feeling during the race. And Mackey really held to that 8 hours, which really helped him break away from Jeff King. And by the time he reached the finish line in Nome, Alaska, with a time of 9 days, 5 hours, 8 minutes, and 41 seconds, he became the first musher in history to win the Yukon Quest and the Iditarod in the same year, wearing the bib 13, the same that his father and brother wore when they won the Iditarod race. But they only won it once. He upped them, not only winning the 2,000-mile races within a month of each other, but he went on to win 4 more in a row, winning 4 straight Iditarods from 2007 to 2010, becoming the first to do so, the first to win back-to-backs, and the first to win 4 in a row. This put a target on Lance's back, and it also put him on a pedestal, and people were looking up to him. What is he doing differently that made him so special? He had a unique love and a unique connection to these dogs, but he also had a passion. He had overcame cancer, and so he knew he was on borrowed time already, and he was fighting for the time he had. Now, unfortunately, he struggled with health on and off for the rest of his career, as he also had Raynaud syndrome, which reduces the blood flow in the body and typically makes the ends of your hands and lips and ears look red, and is triggered by the cold, which made it especially hard for him to do his races. And he also ended up struggling with addiction, testing positive for drugs in 2020. He checked himself into rehab and battled with cocaine and alcohol. And unfortunately, the throat cancer came back. At the age 52, he passed away. But he's still known as one of the top mushers of all time, tied with Jeff King, Robert Rozier, Doug Swingley, Susan Butcher, who all have 4 wins in the Iditarod. Only 2 mushers have more, in Rick Swinson, who has 5, and Dallas Savory, who has 6, and is still mushing to this day. Despite him having a shortened career, he made the most of what he had. He was dealt a lot in life, and dealt with it the best he could, and used his love of dogs and mushing to make a name for himself in the sled dog world, and continue the legacy of the Mackey name where he was born into. I want to thank you for listening to today's Daily Sports History. If you want more sled dog content, check out Mushing Alaska, where your hosts, Sean and Brandon, give you mushing analysis and sled dog news from all the races going on, so you can stay informed every other week on what is going on in the world of sled dogs. And if you want to connect more with me, you can follow me on my socials. Daily Sports History is on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, wherever you like to connect socially, we're there. So you can check out videos and pictures of our episodes. And come back next week for more Daily Sports History.